You are 41 years old and you are staring at a spreadsheet that will never balance. That is the job. Not uncovering fraud, not chasing oligarchs across 3 continents, not sitting in sealed rooms with men who wear their government clearances like jewelry. The job, at its most honest, is reconciliation. You match numbers. You find the delta between what was reported and what was real, and you fill a report that goes upstairs and disappears. You have been doing this for 11 years at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and in those 11 years, you have become very good at disappearing things yourself. The ambition that brought you here, the idealism that kept you here through the first 3 years, the marriage that couldn't survive the 4th. What remains is competence. Precise, joyless, thorough competence, which is, you have come to understand, the most dangerous thing a person in your position can possess. It is a Tuesday in February when the call comes. Not dramatic. No urgency in the voice of the woman who patches you through. You are eating a sandwich at your desk. Turkey. No mustard. When the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes tells you that a man named Gregor Vasiliev has been found dead in a bathtub in Geneva, and that among the items recovered from his hotel suite was a USB drive encrypted with a 256-bit key, and that drive has been cracked, and your name is on it. Not your name as a contact, not your name as a colleague, your name as the author of a 2019 internal report, a report you submitted, watched get filed into a system you assumed was airtight, and never thought about again. That laid out, in 37 meticulously sourced pages, the complete architecture of how 11 of the world's wealthiest individuals were moving money through a daisy chain of shell companies, charitable foundations, and sovereign wealth instruments to avoid not just taxation, but detection entirely. Vasiliev was a mid-level courier in a network you had identified, but never named publicly. He had read your report. He had annotated it. He had, apparently, been using it as a kind of guidebook for his own side operation, a blackmail enterprise targeting 3 of the 11 individuals you had documented. And now he is dead. The bathtub was not an accident. The USB drive was not meant to be found. And the 3 men whose names appeared most prominently in Vasiliev's annotations are men with the resources, the motive, and the demonstrated history of making problems disappear with the same efficiency you've spent your career applying to spreadsheets. The Deputy Assistant Secretary does not tell you that you are in danger. He tells you that you are being reassigned, effective immediately, to a task force with a name so generic it sounds like a euphemism. He tells you that your new role will draw on your existing expertise. He tells you this with the careful neutrality of a man delivering information he does not fully own, which is how you know that the decision was made somewhere above his clearance level. You finish the sandwich. You ask 2 questions. What happens to your open cases, and whether your ex-wife needs to know. And the answers are someone else is handling them, and that is your call. You make the call. She does not answer. You leave a voicemail that says nothing useful, and hang up feeling like you have already begun disappearing in a different way than you expected. The task force operates out of a floor in a building you will never name to anyone. There are 7 of you at first, analysts, 1 former DEA agent named Torres, who still moves like she expects to be followed, a forensic accountant from the IRS who introduces himself by his employee number as a joke that you will not understand for 3 weeks, and a liaison from Treasury whose function seems primarily to be the management of information that cannot officially exist. Your clearance is upgraded twice in the first month. The second upgrade comes with a folder. Inside the folder is everything the government currently knows about where money goes when it does not want to be found. And reading it is the closest thing to a religious experience you have had since your father's funeral. You already knew some of it. The report that got you here was good, but it was necessarily limited. You had been working within the bounds of what FinCEN could subpoena, what foreign financial intelligence units would share, what patterns emerged from the mandatory disclosure regimes that wealthy individuals spent significant resources designing around. What is in the folder is different. It is the product of surveillance programs, of turned insiders, of intelligence relationships with jurisdictions that officially have no intelligence relationship with the United States. It is the skeleton beneath the skin of the global economy, and it is, taken as a whole, a document of breathtaking audacity. The world's wealthiest people are not hiding their money. They are relocating it to a place where the concept of hiding does not apply, because the laws that would define concealment as a crime do not reach there. You spend the first 3 months doing what you do: reading, mapping, reconciling. The architecture is not random. It has logic, even elegance. A nested series of jurisdictions, selected not for secrecy alone, but for the specific legal properties of each layer. A Cayman Islands holding company owns a Luxembourg SPV, which holds a minority stake in a Liechtenstein foundation, whose beneficiaries are a set of trusts administered in the Cook Islands for the benefit of a family office registered in Singapore. Each layer is legal. Each transition between layers is disclosed to the jurisdiction in which it occurs and to no one else. The information exists in 17 different places and is assembled nowhere. Your job, you come to understand, is to be the place where it is assembled. You learn to read the instruments themselves as language. A Delaware LLC with a registered agent and no operating history is a sentence fragment. A British Virgin Islands company with a nominee director and a bearer share structure is a subordinate clause. A Maltese holding company with a double tax treaty with a Gulf state and a correspondent banking relationship through a mid-tier Austrian bank is a complete thought. And if you know how to read the grammar, you know exactly what it is saying. It is saying, this is where the money rests while it waits to become something else. You become, over the course of that first year, fluent. The first name from your original report that reappears in your new work is a man you will call, for reasons that matter to your operational security, the architect. He is not a household name, which is itself a data point. Household name billionaires are, in your experience, among the more transparent members of their class. Their wealth is structural, visible, interlocked with public markets in ways that make true concealment impractical. The architect made his money in logistics infrastructure across Eastern Europe and Central Asia in the decade after the Soviet collapse, which means he made his money in a period of such comprehensive regulatory absence that the fortune's origins are, at this point, archaeologically distant. What concerns you is not where the money came from. What concerns you is where it is going. Over 14 months, working with Torres on the physical surveillance threads and the IRS accountant on the transactional mapping, you trace a movement. The architect is consolidating. Assets that were distributed across 42 jurisdictions are, slowly and with the patience of a man who understands that speed creates patterns, being drawn toward 3 nodes: a family office in Geneva, a real estate holding structure in Dubai, and something the team starts calling the black box, a trust arrangement in a jurisdiction you cannot fully penetrate because the jurisdiction has, in the past 5 years, quietly and comprehensively rewritten its beneficial ownership disclosure laws in ways that appear, to the untrained eye, to represent progress toward transparency and represent to you the most sophisticated regulatory capture you have ever encountered. The moral weight of what you are doing settles on you in increments. You are not a judge. You are not a prosecutor. You are an analyst on a task force whose mandate is to understand. And understanding, you are discovering, is not the same as acting. The architect has not been charged with anything. The movement of assets, as far as any individual jurisdiction is concerned, is lawful. You are watching a man legally relocate resources on a scale that exceeds the GDP of 47 countries, and your job is to watch and to record and to wait for someone above your clearance level to decide what if anything, watching and recording should produce. The second year is when the work becomes personal in a way you did not anticipate and cannot fully justify. You are good enough now to run names, to take a public figure, a senator, a central bank governor, a technology executive whose company has just received a favorable ruling from a regulatory body they were not supposed to have relationships with, and trace backward through the instrument layers until you find the thread that connects them to one of your 11 original subjects. You run the names because the work requires it. You stop sleeping well because the work produces it. What you find is not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. It is not rooms and plans and men deciding to subvert democracy over dinner. It is something more mundane and therefore more durable. It is alignment. Interests so thoroughly and lucratively aligned that the difference between corruption and coincidence has become a distinction without a practical meaning. You write a report, not the kind that disappears. You have learned by now how reports disappear, which is the same as learning how to write one that doesn't. You copy it to 3 locations. You give a sealed copy to a lawyer with instructions she is not to open it unless something happens to you. A sentence you never imagined yourself saying to anyone, and which you say with a steadiness that frightens you a little. The copy you submit through official channels is complete. It is also, you know, going to be read by at least 2 people whose names appear in it, because that is how the system works. And you have decided to submit it anyway because the alternative is to become the kind of analyst who knows what they know and decides that knowing is enough. Nothing happens immediately. This, you have learned, is itself a form of pressure. The waiting is the message. 3 weeks after submission, your access credentials are audited. Routine, you are told. And you have been doing this long enough to know that routine audits do not happen to people who have submitted routine reports. Torres is reassigned to a different task force. The IRS accountant takes early retirement with a rapidity that suggests the retirement was suggested to him. You are not reassigned. You are instead given more. Your clearance is upgraded a 3rd time. You receive access to a new set of instruments, intercepts, financial intelligence sharing agreements with 3 additional countries, a back-channel relationship with a compliance officer at a major Swiss private bank who is motivated by reasons you do not fully know and do not ask about. The message, you gradually understand, is not that you went too far. The message is that you are too useful to silence and too exposed to ignore and too compromised, now, in your own way, to be fully trusted anywhere outside the room you are already in. This is the structure of the trap, and you walked into it with your eyes open, which is not the same as having had a choice. You know too much to be returned to ordinary work. You know too much, in fact, to be deployed in any role that touches the individuals you have documented, because your reports would either be buried or they would be used, and either use of you creates a problem for someone with more leverage than you. What you are, at this point in your career, is a resource in the same category as the instruments you study. Valuable because of what you hold, dangerous because of what you know, and positioned in a jurisdiction, the task force, the sealed floor, the clearance level, that exists specifically to make you inaccessible to the wrong people, while keeping you accessible to the right ones. The irony is not lost on you. You have become, in structure, very much like the things you map. The architect moves again in the 3rd year. The Geneva consolidation was a feint, or perhaps it was a test, calibrated to observe whether it attracted attention, which it did, which tells you something about what he knew and when he knew it. The real movement is quieter, stranger, and it takes you 4 months to understand what you are looking at. He is not moving money between jurisdictions. He is converting it, illiquid to liquid, to digital, to something that does not yet have a legal category in most of the world's financial regulatory frameworks. He is, in short, moving ahead of the law, which is the oldest strategy in the playbook and the one that works most reliably, because the law moves in the direction of the past, and money moves in the direction of the future, and the gap between them, in any given moment, is where fortunes of this scale prefer to live. You write an addendum to the original report, then another, then a third. The Treasury liaison reviews them with the expression of someone reading weather forecasts for a storm that has already passed. He asks you, during one review, whether you believe the architect is aware of the task force. You tell him you believe the architect is aware of everything. You tell him you believe the architect is aware of everything that matters and indifferent to everything that doesn't, and that the task force falls, from his perspective, into the second category. The liaison writes something in his notebook. You watch him write it and understand that you have just provided him with information he will use in a way you will never see, to an end you may not endorse, and that this is, by now, simply the texture of the work. What keeps you here is not idealism. You discarded that somewhere around month 8 of year 2. It is not loyalty, exactly, though you feel something in that direction toward Torres, who you still talk to twice a week, and toward the work itself, which has never lied to you, even when everyone around it has. What keeps you here is something more like obligation to the knowledge itself, the sense that you are the only person alive who holds the complete picture, who has assembled the 17 separate disclosure regimes into a single coherent map, who knows not just where the money is, but why it is there, what it is waiting for, what it will become when the conditions are right. To leave would be to let the map disperse back into its component fragments, each of which is legal, each of which is meaningless in isolation, each of which will be legal and meaningless until the moment it is not. And by then, if you are not there to read the grammar, no one will see it coming. You are 44 years old now. You have not filed your own taxes in 3 years because a different department handles them, and you have been told not to ask why. Your apartment has been swept for listening devices on 4 separate occasions, which you know because you found the evidence of the sweeps, not because anyone told you they were happening. You have become, in certain ways, one of the things you study, distributed, structured for inaccessibility, operating across jurisdictions that don't fully communicate with one another, holding value in the form of knowledge rather than capital, but holding it in a way that makes you, within the specific ecosystem in which you operate, very difficult to simply move. The architect would understand this if he knew it. In a different life, in a different economy, you suspect he would find it professionally admirable. The report on your desk this morning is about a new instrument, a structure involving a foundation registered in a jurisdiction that did not exist 5 years ago, which is to say, a jurisdiction created, in part, by the capital of the individuals who now use it. You read it the way you have learned to read all of them, not for what it says, but for what it assumes. Every instrument assumes a world. It assumes a set of laws, a set of enforcement mechanisms, a set of relationships between states and capital that will remain stable long enough for the structure to serve its purpose. The architect's new instrument assumes a great deal. It assumes, among other things, that you will not finish what you are writing. You turn back to the spreadsheet. The numbers, as always, do not balance. You begin with the patience of someone who has learned that the delta is always there if you look long enough to find it.